Hey guys, welcome back for another week in the China in the global south. Sorry for the light quality. I'm recording this video at night, so I think that we're gonna get it better next week. I'm still setting up the installation here, so to be able to have a greater light when I'm recording. So, and I'm still getting into that habit of making you new videos each week. So to give you a bit of update on what's happening on the China Global South. So last week I did not give you the second video because I introduced the story because we were talking about what was happening with the CCOMIN, the CCOMIN deal, basically the China, the DRC and China deals in the DRC. We didn't get back to that. I'm going to get back to it in this video. So you're going to have a kind of understanding of what happened. And I'm also going to talk about another story of another China DRC feud that's happening still in the mining sector. So, but for today, I'm going to be talking about one principal man story. It's a story that we've been covering and following for quite some time in the China Global South. It's regarding the debt issue that's now impacting Zambia and Ghana in Africa. So what we've covered so far, for those who've been following, you know that there was a creditor committee that was put in place where we had China and other big creditors of Zambia. And we also know that China is the biggest Zambia bilateral creditor China is Zambia's biggest bilateral creditors. And we also know that now, since January, China has been asking for new rules to be implemented between creditors. Basically, now China is asking for MDBs, which are multilateral development banks, which are IMF and World Bank, to also agree to take losses, basically what we call haircuts in their loans in Zambia, which so far they haven't agreed upon yet. So last weekend, there was this meeting in Bangalore, which had, the G20 finance ministry, where they gathered together to try to come to an agreement on how they're going to solve that issue. So far, they haven't come up to a clear agreement and understanding on what's going to happen. So we know yesterday, IMF director Kristina Georgieva came out on an interview on Bloomberg and said that no, MDBs are not going to take haircuts, basically, which means that they are not agreeing with China's demand. On the other side, China has been now more and more vocal in its position because for the last month or weeks, we've seen Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary for the US. We saw David Malpass, the outgoing World Bank director. We saw Kristina Georgieva, IMF director. They've been saying and pointing out fingers to China responsibility on what's happening for the debt issues in Zambia and elsewhere. For example, in Sri Lanka, in Ghana as well, where now, even though China is a small player there, but we saw now people are calling out China to be a member of the creditors committee. So we saw for how long they've been, kind of calling China responsibility in all this debt crisis. So China now is counterattacking with its own narrative, and China has been speaking a lot about what's happening. And we saw now even Mao Ning, China spokesperson of Foreign Affairs, who in the daily press conference, she was really quite vocal about it, and she talked about it last week. And early this week, she also talked about it again, where she was kind of, say, China is not responsible of the debt crisis. And that's even the same narrative now we saw coming out on Chinese media. For example, Xinhua came out with a same column really condemning this narrative against China, pointing out responsibility of external private creditors of Zambia, which most of them are based in the US, in England, in Western countries, because most of them are asset management coming from those countries. So they were kind of saying, those countries bear the biggest responsibility when it comes to the debt crisis in those countries in Zambia, which is not wrong, which is kind of true, because if you do ask those countries, they're going to tell you our biggest problem right now is those private creditors, and most of them are coming from those developed countries. And so far, neither the US or England have been really talking about what can be done with those private creditors. So the question is, how are we going to solve this issue? Obviously, the World Bank does not agree with China, the China demand, or no, for the MDBs to take haircuts. China is not backing away from its position. So for me, the question remains, so what's going to happen to Zambia? We've been talking about it back and forth. We've been going and coming back on this issue. We've been, wondering ourselves what's going to happen, for the intellectuals, for think tankers, for all those people, China's watchers. Yes, that fight between China and the World Bank is still happening. But at the end, people who are following me in Lusaka, in Accra, they've been kind of wondering what's going to happen now. If China and the World Bank do not find an agreement, what's going to happen to us? And this is where I find that solution needs to be found. And I don't know. I really don't know, because so far we are kind of just lost. We are kind of lost about what's going to happen for Zambia. Last week, the finance minister expressed how much they were frustrated because of the talks happening between China and the other creditors, but still no solution. The G20 summit happened in Bangalore this weekend, still no solution. So I think in Lusaka, people are still waiting to see what's going to happen. And this is one of the stories that we're going to keep on following on the China Global South. If you visit our website, you're going to see different stories that we've covered, press conference, Chinese academics talking about it, the IMF director talking about it. So even some of the fact that I missed here in this video, you're going to find them in the news that we've been developing, we've been writing on the China Global South project. So before finishing this video, one last story, and I'm going to get back to the story that I've mentioned last week. It's regarding the Sikomin deal in DRC. For those who've been following, you know what I'm talking about. The Chinese contract between the Congolese government and the Chinese consortium in 2008. In 2008, it was mine against infrastructure. So last week when I was introducing the story, I mentioned how Congolese government was pushing hard with State Auditor's Office coming out with a report asking for an additional 17 billion to add on infrastructure envelope that was supposed to be given for the infrastructure in DRC. So last development was like they kind of find an agreement. They went from 17 billion asked by the Congolese government to $500 million that Sikomin agreed to give to the Congolese government for only 2023. So does it mean, yes, does it mean that the Congolese government will stop asking the 17 billion? We don't know yet. But so far, with $500 million in terms of infrastructure investment for 2023, from a Congolese perspective, yes, it's a kind of good deal because the money can be used, to build infrastructure. And let's not forget, we're in election year, so when you have 500 million given to you during election time, you're going to take it. But we should be expecting the dispute to maybe continue on maybe next year when election will pass. But this agreement shows you something. It shows you how much Chinese have learned how to walk the Congolese politics world. They've learned how to maneuver the environment. And this is something that we should not lose sight of. So because when you listen the story, when you listen every time how people react to this kind of news that the Congolese government are asking for the Chinese to give much more money, they're asking the revision of the agreement, people tend to believe that, yeah, this is the moment where the real change is going to happen. But we kind of forget that down there in DRC, people have different political agenda. So sometimes it's not about good governance, it's about something else. This is the first thing. The second thing, it also shows you how, as I said earlier, Chinese just have learned how to master the political environment in the DRC and in those risky countries. They manage, because for them to be able to be there for more than 15, 20 years where Western companies are not there, it just tells you how much they've been able to work in those environments. Some might say, they've learned to work in a corrupt environment. That's true. That's also not true, because it's just about risk, how to evaluate risk. Another thing I wanted to add on that story, it also tells you something. Let's not misconstrue the fact that the Chinese, the ability to work in a corrupt environment as the willingness to work in a corrupt environment. When you talk with different Chinese businessmen in the mining industry in the DRC, they keep on telling you how much it's just hard. It's just hard to do business in such environment. And I'm sure on their side, they'd like also to have a much better government, a much better business environment, less corruption, much more political stability, allowing them, to do business as they do in South Africa, in countries like Namibia and elsewhere. So that environment just shows you how much the mining industry in the DRC is a quite unstable and, difficult environment to maneuver. So this is the story I wanted to cover with you in this week. Last one story before I forget. For those who've been following the story, it's on our website, both in English and in French. It's in another mining dispute in the DRC. It's the Gécamine against China Molybdenum over Teke Fungurume mining in the DRC. Teke Fungurume mine is one of the largest copper and cobalt mine in the world. So for almost 2 years now, those two sides have been fighting over mining rights and royalties that Gécamine is asking from China Molybdenum. Basically, Gécamine is asking 7.6 billion to be given to them for the past years. I mean, for like those past years, they have accused China Molybdenum to have underestimated the real reserve of Teke Fungurume mines and thus impacting the mining revenue they do to Gécamine. So this week, Bloomberg has reported that 120,000 tons of copper and almost 15,000 tons of cobalt have been blocked in the DRC, which with a value of 1.5 billion, they've been blocked in the DRC. They cannot leave the country because, the Congolese government and through Gécamine have just decided to stop and CMOC export. So this is another story that we are going to follow this week on the China Global South. So just stay tuned, and thank you again for your support and for you being tuned to follow us on the China Global South. And I'm sorry again, the light quality was not good. We are working on that, and I hope by next week we're going to have a much better light quality for you to enjoy the quality of this video. So on that, I'm going to stop here. It was supposed to be a short video. Now I'm going really long. I'm just going to stop here. See you next week for another video on the China Global South.